Welcome back, Week 7, National Football League. We are here for the No Quarter Given podcast. I'm your host, Jason Powers, along with my co-host, Peter Blake. We'll get to Peter in just one second. You're listening to the podcast as part of the buckpower.com podcast network. Our Bucs are 5-1 after a Thursday night victory in Philadelphia. Kind of a little closer than it needed to be there towards the end there, Peter, but we're off to 5-1 with a nice 10-day break between week 6 and week 7. Welcome back, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be back, and you're exactly right. Too close for comfort. 28-22. Bucs go to 5-1, and really the story of this game was the Bucs penalty situation. More yards than the offense for the Philadelphia Eagles. It really kept that offense in the game, if you will, and the injury situation didn't improve with losing a Richard Sherman. But with all that being said, Jason Powers, having defensive injuries, offensive injuries, some really key ones, you're still 5-1 looking at the Chicago Bears coming at Raymond James on Sunday. So you're in great shape at this point.
No doubt, no doubt. And you got some help in the division. You got Carolina lost another game. They're 3-3. New Orleans was out of bye week. So I think they're 3-2 or 3-2? 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Comfortable lead either way. Comfortable, I don't think there's any doubt that the Bucs are the cream of the crop of the division. You got the Bears this week. You got the next couple of weeks, you got a favorable schedule. So things are looking up for our Tampa Bay Buccaneers as the Bears come to town Sunday afternoon, 4:25. I think this is a Tony Romo, Jim Nantz game. I think it's a CBS game. It's one of those crossover games. I think I saw a promotion. I heard Romo and Nantz talking about they were going to be in Tampa this week. Don't quote me on that, but I thought I heard him say that last week when they were doing their 4:00 game.
And, it always goes back to last year, right? I mean, the Bucs losing on Thursday Night Football 20-19. That was also a nationally televised game. You hear reports tonight that Robert Quinn, 5.5 sacks, is going to be on the COVID list. So he may not play on Sunday. That's a big-time advantage. Of course, the Bears coming in with a rookie quarterback and a Justin Fields who somewhat struggled versus the Packers. And let's hope that this defense for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Todd Bowles, has something schematically cooked up, if you will, for this rookie quarterback to confuse him and, of course, keep him contained. They didn't do a lot of that versus a Jalen Hurts. He really hurt them, if you will, with his feet.
Yeah, you got Jalen. I mean, you got Justin Fields coming off the 24-14 loss at home last week to the Packers. Your boy Aaron Rodgers owns Chicago. Apparently, he owns the franchise and the city with after the touchdown run, talking smack to the fans of Chicago. So, you're right. This is an interesting week for Todd Bowles. Do they go more zone defense? Do they play man? Do they really heat it up as far as the blitz game goes? Be an interesting matchup to see how they go. And there's a chance Rob Gronkowski's back for the Buccaneers on Sunday as well.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big-time get because, look, O.J. Howard definitely stepped up, but again, against a talented defense, you're going to need that extra tight end. And a Gronk, we know not only his pass-catching ability, but as an inline blocker, he is second to none, so you would like to have him back in that offense. But, that offense just keeps on getting better and better. And even against that defense, you would think that you would have some type of home field advantage, especially if the Bucs defense shows up. They had an opportunity to have a lot of sacks versus a Jalen Hurts. They can get that same pressure on Justin Fields and stifle that offense. That puts more pressure on that defense, which you leave them on that field for that much time, that would favor that Bucs offense.
No doubt about it, no doubt. So let's get to the history of the Bucs and the Bears. This is the 61st meeting. The Bears lead the overall series 40-20. I remember the Bears as part of the NFC Central back in the day. Before we went to the NFC South, you had the Central with all the northern teams, Detroit, Green Bay, Minnesota, Chicago, and then you had the team down south here in Tampa. That was part of the kind of the expansion when the Bucs got slotted in with expansion. They kind of got slotted in with the NFC Central Division. Some classic matchups back in the day. I remember, growing up, I remember all those Green Bay, Chicago, Detroit matchups, and we're going to get in here. Obviously, we're going to get into the to the Bears as well. What are your memories from the, back in the day, you growing up with the Bears?
Lots of losses. I mean, honestly, 40-20, this is not a sterling mark, if you will, and not a lot of great memories until Tony Dungy, of course, came to town. You had those defensive teams, but you always remember Mike Ditka. You remember earlier on Walter Payton, Mike Singletary, and then later on you had a Brian Urlacher, a Lance Briggs. So not necessarily the best memories.
Right.
Although looking back at it, 1989, I had no idea the Bucs actually swept them. And usually when the Bears come to town, the great thing was, we always talk about this, Jason Powers, there was a lot of blackouts. When the Bears came to town, there was no blackout because half or the majority of the stadium were Chicago Bear fans.
Yeah, I was going to talk. That was going to be one of the points I wanted to talk about, how they always, all the northern teams, especially when they played down here, they would always draw a big crowd. Chicago, Detroit, the big northern cities, especially Chicago, with it being an every year visit. They used to invade Tampa State, the old Tampa Stadium, when the Bears would come to town. And many of the years in the 80s, especially when the Buccaneers were not any good, you would have times when more than half the crowd would be Chicago Bear fans.
Yeah, I know. And it was disappointing, but that's the sign of the times. I mean, that's the way it was back then. The Bucs, of course, being the laughing stock of the National Football League. And, of course, the Chicago Bears during that heyday of the 85 Super Bowl shuffle with Mike Ditka and that talented defense that included, once again, Singletary, Richard Dent, the Fridge Perry, of course, Steve,
Jim McMahon.
Yes, Steve McMichael. Just so many talented names defensively and offensively. So, and they were still beating the Bucs up at that time. So,
yep, 1983. Let's go to 1983. The Bucs were kind of at the end of their, the tail end of their playoff run there, starting in 79. 83, they win a late season game in overtime. Bill Capice kicks a game winner against the Bears in early January to send the Bucs to the playoffs for the third time in 4 years.
Yeah, and of course, I believe they lost to the Dallas Cowboys in the first round like they did the year before, much like the Philadelphia Eagles with the Bucs and Tony Dungy. So, yeah, you beat the Bears, you get to the playoffs, and then you lose to the Cowboys. But a good win, of course, anytime you can beat a division rival, especially the Chicago Bears, you'll take it.
No doubt. 1985, we all remember the Bears were the dominant team in 85, winning the 86 Super Bowl. They lost, I believe, one regular season game. The only game they lost was that memorable Monday night game in Miami. Dan Marino lit up the 46 defense on that memorable Monday night. But opening day that year in 1985, the Bucs and the Bears tangled, and the Bucs have a 28-17 lead at the half, score 28 points in the first game of that year, led by James Wilder. And then, of course, we melt down in the second half and lose 38-28.
That's kind of amazing, isn't it, against the Bears defense like that? But it just tells you at that point they weren't as good as they were going to be during that season. And sometimes teams start off a little bit slow, and to blow a lead like that, I mean, it's so Bucs. It's Bucs fashion, honestly.
And that was Lehman Bennett's first game as head coach following John McKay's retirement. So, there was there expectations? Who knows? But, Lehman's lemons, as we all remember Lehman's lemons for his 2-year run as the coach of the Bucs.
Yeah, and Bucs fans like, man, it's a new day in Tampa Bay, which, by the way, Sam Weiss saying when Weiss came here, and fans were thinking, oh, Lehman Bennett's a great coach. They're beating the Chicago Bears. And then at the end of the game, Lehman Bennett is a bum. We need to fire this guy. That's typical Bucs.
Not good. Not good.
Not good.
The one interesting thing about those mid-80 games, that was really the emergence of James Wilder. That became a household name for the Buccaneer franchise and around the league. Remember, Ricky Bell was kind of the running back in the early 80s for the Bucs, but James Wilder, that in those mid-80s, that for that 4, 5, 6 year stretch, he was the centerpiece of the Buccaneer offense.
Jason, with the removal of John Gruden, do you think the Bucs should consider putting James Wilder in the Ring of Honor? And in your opinion, why hasn't he been put in the Ring of Honor with his statistics?
That's a good question. I mean, I would imagine he's on a list. The one thing I don't know all the details, but I think he's had a couple of off-field things. I don't know about necessarily in trouble, like arrested, but I think he's been involved in a couple of off-field things over the years here in the Tampa Bay area. Many of you that are in the Tampa area may remember his son, James Wilder Jr., was a big-time high school player at Plant High School, went off to Florida State, played for 4 years, went and played the Canadian Football League, and he had a cup of coffee in the NFL. So we remember that name, James Wilder Jr. But James Wilder that's a great point you make. I don't know all the details behind that, but you would think he would be a definite candidate to be in the Ring of Honor if those off the field issues are not an issue.
Well, compared to John Gruden at this point, I mean.
Well, I mean, now, yeah, Gruden.
True. I'm just saying, I mean,
you're right.
Besides a James Wilder, does a Hardy Nickerson, does a Warrick Dunn, is, the removal of Gruden, who is on your list? If not Wilder, who would be the next guy on your list to get in the Ring of Honor?
I would probably say a guy like Warrick Dunn would probably be the next guy. I mean, a guy like him, I'm trying to think. I don't know all the guys. Is Lynch in yet? Have they put Lynch in?
I believe they have.
Okay.
I believe.
Is Rondé in?
Rondé's in, yes.
Yeah. I would think a guy like Warrick Dunn. The only thing with Warrick, he was only here 4.5, 5 years. So maybe that's, a deterrent because of his longevity, because he left and went to the Falcons. Sure. Who knows if there's any bad feelings there within the organization. I don't know. But
he came back. I mean, he had a second stint with the Tampa Bay Bucs.
True. I would say Dunn or Hardy Nickerson, because people don't remember Nickerson was one of the first free agents we ever signed. Like when they really started free agency in the early 90s, he was the first guy to really come to Tampa, and he was a stalwart in the middle of that defense for several years, and was turning that culture around during the Sam Weiss era and all that stuff, and leading into Tony Dungy.
He really was. He was a big-time free agent pickup from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a lot of people opened their eyes and said, you know what, the Bucs could be on the right track here with the hardware man. And I know for a fact, talking to former Buccaneer great Chidi Ahanatu, he feels like Nickerson should be in the Ring of Honor. He talked about Nickerson and his impact on his career, how this player took him underneath his wing and really showed him the intricacies, if you will, Leo word, of what the National Football League is all about. So definitely Hardy Nickerson, Warrick Dunn, what he did off the field, not only on the field. And I get it. People say, you have to have a certain time period. But for me, Warrick Dunn, Hardy Nickerson, James Wilder, I don't think you can go wrong with any of those names.
No, I agree with that. 1989, the Bucs sweep the Bears. They played 2 wild games. The first game in October, the Bucs win 42-35 in a shootout. And then game 2, later in November, a quick turnaround, the Bucs are up 13 with about 6 minutes to go. The game gets tied, and then Donald Igwe-Buike wins it 32-31 on a game winner at the end. Remember old Donald Igwe-Buike, the guy he was a Nigerian kicker. I remember him well. That was kind of right in my day of high school football. I was a kicker in high school myself, so I always, kept up with Igwe-Buike, and always he had an interesting little career with the Buccaneers.
Absolutely. Big time kicks out of Clemson. The guy had a leg to kill. And of course, he had his own problems off the field, but he made some big time Bucs kicks in the history.
He did.
I remember during that game, big time play, Vinny Testaverde to Mark Carrier, 78 yards to the house. And that was the connection that day. That was the connection during that year. I believe, and I'm not certain about this, don't quote me on this, but I believe Mark Carrier was a Pro Bowler that year, correct?
Yeah, I think you're right. And that'd be another guy that I would consider. Mark Carrier had a very good career with the Buccaneers. He could be a guy, and he played a long time for the Bucs. He could be a guy, maybe down the road, that he could be a guy that you could put in potentially into the Ring of Honor, because he had a very long, stellar career. Even though they lost, they were perennial losing teams, but he had a very solid NFL career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, just imagine that. He's being put in the same breath at that time as Jerry Rice. And as a Bucs fan, you're ecstatic because there really weren't a lot of bright spots.
Yep.
Especially offensively. Paul Gruber, Mark Carrier, Vinny up and down. But those are the two guys that you're really like, okay, these are the guys I'm going to watch if I'm a Bucs fan.
One thing I want to ask your opinion on. One thing it always got my juices flowing a little bit. when it came to the schedule, when it came to the Bucs playing these northern teams, whether it was us having to play up there in the cold part of the year, November, December, or vice versa, when those teams would have to come down here in early September and the heat would be a major factor. You know, it was always interesting how the schedule would play out. When would the Bears come here? When did we have to go up there? You know, 1990, we go up in Chicago 2 days before Christmas, and it's the coldest game in Bucs history, 11 degrees. Major advantage for the Bears. And obviously the other way around for us when they play, when those central teams, the Green Bays, the Detroits, the Chicagos would play here in early September with the heat.
But Jason, you knew back then when the Bucs played up north and they played in the cold weather, they were never going to win. And you knew it 5 minutes into the game, because when you saw the pregame and you saw the Bucs players all wrapped up in their mittens and everything, and they were looking like they wanted to be back in Tampa, they're going to lose that game all day long. So you never felt good about watching this game. And it was a disservice by the National Football League. I could never understand that. Why could they never schedule the Bucs in September to go to Chicago instead of November or December? It made no sense at all, but it always killed the Bucs when it came time to play.
Yeah, I mean, you still see that stuff nowadays too. When Miami has to go to Buffalo in late December, right, or New England has to come to Miami the first week of the year and down here in the heat. So it's just, again, I don't kill the NFL for doing that. That's part of the allure of the rivalry is, the heat games versus the cold games, all that stuff. And that's, every team has their own version of home field advantage. And for the Bucs, a lot of the advantage is the heat, especially early in the year.
It is. You're exactly right. But, you're happy to get out of that division because you would have to play those cold weather games up in Green Bay, up in Chicago. Minnesota had a dome. Detroit had a dome. But you felt like, if you were in the playoffs at that point, you always had to get a first round bye, because if not, you would have to go on the road up north.
Typically.
And more times than not, the Bucs would not win that game in the cold, unless, of course, you're talking about the Super Bowl year. But
1998, we transitioned from Tampa Stadium to Raymond James Stadium. First home game opening of Raymond James. The Chicago Bears come to town. The Bucs win the game 27-15. Interesting thing here, they score all 27 in the second half. Always interesting. Was that Trent Dilfer?
It was.
That was Trent.
And it was a terrible start because they were down 15-0, and you were like, what the hell is going on? And that 98 year was really weird because, of course, you were coming off the playoff year of 10-6, beating the Lions and, of course, losing to the Packers. So the expectations at that point are just so high. You're in Raymond James Stadium. You're trying to christen this new stadium, and you're down 15-0. And you were like, oh, I don't know if they're going to win it. But, of course, the Bucs offense came back. The defense stifled the Bears, and they won 27-15. I remember it like it was yesterday.
A mere 2 years later, the Bucs, with their biggest margin of victory in franchise history, a 41-0 beatdown of the Bears. The Bears were kind of in a downward period. The Bucs were rising with Dungy. The perennial playoff teams those years. You had the Sapp, the Brooks, and all those guys on defense. The Bucs were going this way, and the Bears were kind of in decline. 41-0.
Love it. Never get tired of a blowout, 41-0. I don't necessarily remember who scored that game. I just remember sitting for the whole game and watching it. And somebody said, well, it's a blowout. Well, I enjoy it because throughout those years, you could never enjoy a blowout. You would be the team that's getting blown out. So you enjoy those type of things on Sunday. 41-0, a shellacking of the Chicago Bears. Love it.
I mean, when you really think about this series, the last 20 years or so, it's really been highlighted by defensive studs. Urlacher, Sapp, Brooks, Simeon Rice, the Bears defense, Khalil Mack of today. It's been a very defensive-oriented franchises over the years. The Bucs and Bears have never, other than the Bucs now, the Bucs in both these franchises have kind of laid their hat on the defensive side of the ball.
Can you remember 2001? Because I got a story to tell. I was working at Hooters at the time in Palm Harbor.
What?
Yes.
Hooters?
Yes, I was working as a busboy, not as a cook.
Yeah. I know why. I know where your head was tilted all the time as the busboy.
Well, of course, but on Sundays you get a chance to watch the Bucs game, and the big boss is a Bears fan, and I believe the Bears that year with Jim Miller were 13-3. I mean,
Yeah.
they were the talk of the National Football League with that defense and that offense doing things. Booker at the time, Michael Booker,
Marty Booker, Marty Booker.
Michael Booker, Marty Booker, yes, was doing things. And I remember this game, the Bucs go all the way down. It looks like they're going to come back. They're down by 12, and they missed the field goal. And it was just like you wanted to brag that day to your boss. But honestly, I was scared to get fired because he was the biggest Chicago Bear fan of all time. So I really had to be, quiet that day. When the Bucs scored, I kind of pumped my fist a little bit, in the corner. Most of the people there were all Bucs fans, but he was a big-time Bears fan. And I feel like if I would have pissed him off, most likely I would have went home early or possibly been fired. I will never forget that day. And he was so happy I didn't say nothing. I was like, congratulations, the Bears won. I wanted that day to end because I definitely didn't want to face him being a Bears fan. And, of course, he gave it to me because I told him before then I thought the Bucs were going to beat the Bears, but it was not the Bucs year.
Now I know why. Now I know why orange is your favorite color from your days at Hooters. Staring at all that booty.
Good job, Jason Powers. Appreciate that. Good stuff.
Oh God! All right, 2002, the Super Bowl year for the Buccaneers. We break the curse. We break the cold weather, streak. Martin Gramatica, 5 field goals in Chicago, late December. Bucs win 15-0, pitch a shutout.
Ugly game, nationally televised, but you're facing the 3rd and 4th string quarterback. And I believe at the time it was, and I'm looking here, it was Moses Moreno. Was that the quarterback for the Bears at the time?
Oh my God. If it's Moses Moreno, now I know why we shut him out.
No, it's not Moses Moreno. It was Henry Burris.
Yeah, even worse.
Right. But he was nothing. But you thought at the time, Jason Powers, they had Rob Johnson starting. You're going up in a cold weather game. Of course, the Packers lost earlier on that day to the Jets. So the Bucs had an opportunity to get a first round bye. And you're like, there's no way like something bad is going to happen. But sure enough, that defense came through. The offense was ugly that game, but it was the ugliest / prettiest win of all time because the Bucs got the first round bye. And of course, they got the proverbial monkey off their back and playing in cold weather. They beat the Bears in that nasty cold weather. So it was a sweet victory.
And then later on went on to beat went to Philadelphia. Yep. And ended this, shut down the vet in another cold game. So that was you knocked all the old history was out the door after that playoff run.
But think about how important that first round bye was. If you don't win that game versus the Bears, who knows if Brad Johnson plays throughout the playoffs.
Right.
He was suffering from an injury. This Bucs team was beaten up. They always talked about getting that first round bye. And once they secured it, you felt really good about it because at the end of the day, you get that first round bye and you don't necessarily have to play that wild card game. You don't have to play on the road. You can play at home. And you get a chance to possibly host an NFC championship game, which didn't necessarily work out. Philadelphia was the number 1 seed. So you went to Philadelphia, but you got to get that number 1 bye to get everybody rested.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very important. It's still important to this day. I'm Jason. You're listening to Peter Blake. We are the hosts here of the No Quarter Given podcast on the buckpower.com podcast network. Again, fans, for all of your Buck history, whether it's Chicago Bears, New Orleans Saints, Patriots, any team in the league, buckpower.com is the place to go. Paul Stewart, the unofficial historian of the franchise, has an unbelievable site where you can stats, video, audio, information nuggets, everything you can think about Bucs related. The history of the franchise is there. Definitely go to buckpower.com.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to him. We can't wait for him to come down and meet us all for the New York Giants game. And just a plethora of knowledge with this, history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if you mess up and you say, well, was it Moses Moreno? Was it Henry Burris? You can find out it was Henry Burris right there on buckpower.com. Again, Paul Stewart does a hell of a job with talking about Tampa Bay Buccaneer history.
And he lets us come on and talk for him, part of the podcast network. In the last game we want to talk about, 2011, speaking of Paul Stewart, London, England. Wembley, the Bucs are playing. Raheem Morris, the head coach. Bucs lose 24-18 in London. It's the start of a 10-game losing streak that sees the demise of one Raheem Morris as head coach.
And that year, they started out 4-2, did they not?
I think you're right.
And I remember this because at the time, I was at 10:10 a.m. I was doing a show called The Sports Mob. Yours truly, Jenna Lane. That was her first radio show.
Okay.
Another guy by the name of Sam Oxidine, Sam the Godfather. And I was screaming at the top of the rooftops, at the top of mountains, please let the Bucs go out into free agency and spend money. And they refused to do that. We were all bought into LeGarrette Blount, which he was good the year before. You know, he was he was okay. But it really ruined that part of the team because after the 10-6, and I even talked to the late great Geno Hayes about this on the Geno Hayes show, and he said when the Bucs didn't go after free agents, that really killed the morale of that team. And I remember it so vividly how I was hoping that this would turn around, but when it didn't, boy, and it started with the Chicago Bears in London, and you just knew there were so many question marks. Could they do it? Could they do it again? Tougher schedule. I felt like they missed out on an opportunity to go out in free agency. I think it affected it. And then on top of it, Raheem Morris eventually was fired, and you got the greatness of Greg Schiano, which wasn't great. But consequently, the very next year, they went out and splurged in free agency. We'll never forget that year because we had so many interviews with guys, and they were so excited, and there was some optimism. But for me, it was like, look, you missed out on an opportunity. The NFL was locked out. You had an opportunity to spend all kinds of money in free agency, and the Bucs refused to do it.
And remember that was kind of the couple year period where there was speculation about the Glazers and Manchester United, about they were, I won't say hemorrhaging money with them, but they were, very conscious of the budget when it came to the Buccaneers because they were pumping in a bunch of money into Manchester United. So I think that was kind of the couple year period where they were pretty quiet in free agency. And then that next year, when Schiano came aboard, there was probably an expectation for Schiano to take the job. Hey, if I'm going to take the job, you got to spend money.
Yeah, you got to spend money. And the Glazers knew it didn't work out for them. It didn't work out with the fan support. The fans stopped coming out there. Of course, the waiting list that they had, it dwindled down. Of course, this was after John Gruden being fired. You had Raheem Morris coming in. It was a rebuilding effort. But at the end of the day, when you have the tool of free agency, and Mark Dominic didn't necessarily do the best job of drafting at that point, that's the reason why you have that tool. So you could basically have a Band-Aid, if you will, if you do miss out on those draft picks. And, to Dominic's credit, at the time when some of these players were drafted, you were like, okay, maybe they'll work out. They had some injury red flags that didn't necessarily work out. Comes to mind Aurelius Spin as a wide receiver, had an opportunity to go out and get a wide receiver.
Right.
Quarterback, you went with a guy that was really young. Can't think of his name, but God, he was so young, and he felt bad for him because they were treating him like he was a number 1 or number 2 corner, and he just didn't cut the mustard for this defense. In fact, this defense was really bad. Right.
All right, as we wrap it up, give me your thoughts. Sunday, 425. Again, the Bucs are double-digit favorites, about 12.5, 13-point favorites. Clearly, we're the better team. It's just a matter of, again, it's going to be a defensive effort for the Bears if they're going to stay in the game. Khalil Mack, you got Eddie Jackson, those guys you got to contain. Akeem Hicks versus Brady and the Bucs offense. How do you see the game?
Bears keep it close early, but the Bucs eventually blow them out. And it's because, the defense, you got one, but they're going to be on the field a long time because that offense is not going to be able to do a lot against that Bucs defense. And I get it. They're missing Richard Sherman. They're missing Sean Murphy Bunting, but they're going to be able to get enough pressure on a Justin Fields. And even though he can hurt you with his legs, at the end of the day, I think Matt Nagy is a dead man walking. I don't think he can put together a game plan enough to go over on a Todd Bowles. I like the Bucs in this game by 10 or 12 points. I do.
No, I agree. I think you'll see the Bucs refreshed, having 10 days off. You'll have, obviously they lost Sherman, but probably won't have Levante David, but you'll probably have Gronk back. You'll probably have Winfield back. Yeah. So you'll have some reinforcements, starters back in the lineup. I think you'll see it again, very crisp. Antonio Brown, a huge factor in the Philadelphia game. And then to me, again, it's the weapons. Too many weapons for the Buccaneers. The Bears are a good defense, but they play a lot of zone. If you contain, don't let Khalil Mack wreck the game, which they don't ever, the Bucs do a good job offensive line wise, containing the best pass rusher for the most part. Do your thing. I think you'll see the Bucs score 30. I'm looking at, a 34-14, 34-17 kind of game. Comfortable win for the Buccaneers. As the next week, Jameis Winston and the New Orleans Saints come to town.
Ooh.
And we will have that preview.
Yes.
On the next edition of the No Quarter Given podcast. So that'll be a doozy with Jameis coming back to town. The last game before the bye week. Lots of history.
You're going to New Orleans.
My mistake. You are right.
Halloween.
You are correct. My mistake.
That's
My mistake. You are right.
That's okay, buddy. But yeah, you get to go to New Orleans for Halloween, trick or treat, and you have Jameis Winston, the Big Easy. We'll see if Michael Thomas plays in that game.
Right.
Some question of that. Of course, that would help out their offense. But, you go back to it and you talk about the Chicago Bears. And look, they may be able to keep it close because of that defense. But at the end of the day, Matt Nagy and that offensive line is just terrible. There were
not good.
Many opportunities for that Bucs defensive line to get sacks on Hurts, and he did such a great job of escaping. I don't think Fields can do that this Sunday, so that's why I like the Bucs big. And of course, we'll be out of Ducky Sports Lounge.
Yep.
Getting ready on NSPN. I Love St. Pete with your pre-half and post-game editions. Yours truly, Jason Powers, the greatness of Blake Anthony, and who knows, all kinds of fans out there screaming Tampa Bay. Making sure that I lose my voice the next day. Hopefully not, but it should be a good time.
Tell everybody where they can find you on social media. I know obviously NSPN, you're hosting your show. You just got done hosting your show tonight. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, the sports web, it's the evolution of sports talk television live on NSPN. And of course, I Love St. Pete, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, sometimes Fridays. You just never know. And of course, live at Ducky Sports Lounge. Friend me on Facebook, Peter H. Blake. Really don't do a lot of Twitter. pblake1003 at thesportsweb.com. I don't know. I don't really tweet at people. I'm more of a Facebook guy. I get on there. YouTube, of course, the Sports Web on YouTube. Go and subscribe to the channel there. So, again, just friend me on Facebook or look for me on YouTube, and who knows, maybe Twitter too.
And check out the Powers on Sports podcast, my podcast. Other than this one, we're talking NFL, college football. You had the firing of Rolovich at Washington State because he wouldn't get vaccinated. We also this episode that's coming out will be coming out on Wednesday night, Thursday morning. We'll also have another installment of our Life of the Wife series. I interview Erica Betcher, the wife of James Betcher, who used to be the defensive coordinator for Bruce Arians in Arizona. He's now in San Francisco as an assistant. We interview his wife, Erica, to talk about her life as the wife of James Betcher. So check out the Powers on Sports podcast, all of your podcast platforms. And again, Peter Blake, he and I will be at Ducky's on Sunday. Keep up the great work, Peter. You're the man on Sundays. You run the show on Sundays, steering the ship. I try to interject some live updates about games, scores, injuries, fantasy. We have a great time at Ducky. So, folks, find us, subscribe. No Quarter Given podcast. Find us, tell your friends about us. We're here every week. And next week, the New Orleans Saints. Hopefully, it's a 6-1 Buccaneer team heading to New Orleans. We'll see you next week, folks. Have a great week.
Go Bucs!